Zoom working? Zoom? People are connected? We can.
Yeah, Zoom is okay.
Ready to start? Thank you. I'm really sorry. I know that this room is a little bit small, but I think we'll try to adjust. So welcome to all of you. Jai Bhim, Johar, Salam, Opera, Roma, Salve and Salute. It's my absolute pleasure to be here to chair this panel. And we have some esteemed guests as well as panelists and voices from the ground. We have with me Honorable Mr. Suman Raj Aryal, who is the Secretary of the Ministry of Women and Child and Senior Citizens Government of Nepal. We have Ms. Julia Bunton from the UNFPA and Marie Elena John from UN Women. I'm also joined by some fantastic representatives from the community. We have Simona Torotskoy from the Roma community. We have Ms. Versilini Diaz from the Quilombola community and Ms. Queen from Africa. This year's agenda about accelerating the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls for addressing poverty and strengthening institutions and financing with a gender perspective is a very critical aspect in achieving the Agenda 2030. It says on the website that data from 48 developing economies shows that an additional 360 billion is needed per year to achieve gender equality and women's empowerment across key global goals, including to end poverty and hunger, which is the theme this year. A UN Women study states that an average Dalit woman from India dies 14.6 years younger than those from the dominant caste. This is a report that was released a few years ago by UN Women. Those left fathers behind in society are often women and girls who experience multiple forms of disadvantages based on gender and other inequalities like caste, like indigeneity, like your social location. This, according to the study, can result in clustered deprivations. Their access to quality education, decent work, health and well-being are all then become barriers to this. So today we have, as we already said, representatives from Nepal and UN agencies here. So please brace yourselves to learn and understand the issues around poverty of women and girls from the communities discriminated on work and descent. Communities discriminated on work and descent, as we know, are the Dalit community within South Asia and diaspora, the Haratin in Mauritania. These are just some examples, but not the whole list. We have Quilombola community from Brazil. We have the Burakumin community from Japan. And we have the Roma community from from Europe, Romania being one of the countries. These communities are discriminated and segregated based on their social location and identity, and especially women from these communities face the brunt of poverty. Before we go ahead, I'd like to say that we will be tweeting, we will be using social media, and for anyone not wanting to be quoted or pictured, please let us know and we will refrain from doing so. So now I would like to hand over the time to the first Secretary of the Nepal, from the Nepal Government of Nepal, Mr. Suman Raj Aryal, who is the Secretary to the Minister of Women, Children and Senior Citizens. Mr. Aryal.
Thank you, Quilombola. Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, representative from UNFPA, UNDP. Panelists, distinguished guests. First of all, I express my happiness to have this opportunity to be a part of this event and share our thoughts on this very important and relevant theme. We know that poverty has a female face. It has disproportionately affected women globally. Women from descent communities are doubly disadvantaged. For them, poverty has remained both the cause and effect of discrimination. In addition, multiple crises including COVID-19, conflicts, climate change, and the cost of living crisis have exacerbated their existing vulnerabilities and challenges. Excellencies, many countries are off track from achieving SDGs. Ending poverty and hunger has become an uphill task. If the current trends continue, only 1/3 of countries will have halved their national poverty rates by 2030. This is going to affect mostly women and girls. More than 340 million women and girls will still be in poverty by 2030. This will hit the hardest to Decsent and poorest communities within society and among the countries. Against this backdrop, it is incumbent upon us to reverse the trend. We need to take action with urgency. We need to ensure the effective, mandatory, and meaningful participation of all in the decision-making process. We need to address multiple vulnerabilities women and girls are facing. We must bridge the gender wage gap. We must take action to ensure pay without discrimination based on work, descent, caste, race, color, religion, or country of origin, among others. We should end discrimination faced for generations by distinct communities in different parts of the globe, be it Asia, Africa, Europe, and Americas, or others. Excellencies, Nepal has made remarkable progress in addressing discrimination against distant communities through policy intervention and other measures. Human rights are the bedrock of our constitution, based on universally recognized core values such as equality, non-discrimination, justice, and the rule of law. These are duly internalized into our national laws, policies, and practices. Nepal has fully embraced the basic principles of non-discrimination, effective participation, and protection and promotion of the identity of the minorities as stated in the UN Minorities Declaration. Any form of untouchability or discrimination in any private or public places or grounds of his or her origin, caste, tribe, community, profession, occupation, or physical condition based on race, religion, caste, class, or gender is punishable by law in Nepal. I also wish to emphasize that the government of Nepal has also adopted the policies of empowering the women and girls of marginalized communities. The National Gender Equality Policy 2021 envisions establishing gender equitable nations through strategic preparedness, legal and institutions arrangement, as well as program and budgetary systems. Distinguished delegates, nevertheless, we have multiple constraints to achieve the desired outcomes: structural, social, cultural, economic, and others. Deeper trust, strong solidarity, and close partnership and cooperation within society and among international community are as urgent as ever to overcome these challenges. Nepal stands ready to work with all relevant international communities and entities to ensure the rights of the communities discriminated against based on work or descent. Though miles to go, we stand ready to share our experience and best practices as one of the champions in terms of policy harmonization to address the issues of caste-based discrimination. Let's work to help millions of women and girls from distant communities extricate themselves from the clutches of poverty. Let us work together to ensure that all human beings, irrespective of their caste or descent, are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ariel, to bringing out how poverty and other indicators really affect women from the marginalized communities disproportionately. And we have really observed that Nepal has some really good policies, and Nepal can lead the way to ensure that we have, and we call upon Nepal to lead the way to ensure that we have policies that are inclusive. They have even having this gender equality policy. Many countries in South Asia don't have that policy, so congratulations to Nepal, and we hope that we will continue to work together to take this forward. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ms. Julia Bunting, who's currently the UNFPA Director of both the Technical Division and Policy and Strategy Division until August 2024, when she will serve as Director of the Integrated UNFPA Program Division. Julia brings to this new role exceptional experience spanning over 25 years in both the public and non-profit sectors. As President and CEO of the Population Council, Julia spearheaded the development and implementation of a transformative strategic plan, significantly strengthened resource mobilization and efforts in bringing in new funders, and enhanced focus on research utilization and impact. So I'm sure that Julia will have a lot more to add to this discourse. So Julia, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bina, and good afternoon to everybody attending today. It's such a pleasure to be here. Let me start by thanking our colleagues from the government of Nepal and our partners at the Global Forum of Communities Discriminated on Work and Descent. Your work as champions for the rights of girls and women, especially those from marginalized communities, is absolutely vital. We'd also like to recognise our sister agencies, UN Women and UNDP, for their collaboration with UNFPA in organising this important event today. Indeed, our presence here today is testament to the importance we place in better understanding, identifying and overcoming discrimination, marginalisation and poverty, in particular for women and girls. Distinguished delegates, research continues to point out the disproportionate impact of poverty on women. And we know that women from descent communities, ethnic, racialized groups, face yet a heavier burden as they address multiple forms of intersecting discrimination, which further leaves them behind. For instance, recent UNFPA analysis on the maternal health of women and girls of African descent in the Americas found that Afro-descendant women and girls are disadvantaged before, during, and after pregnancy. Afro-descendant maternal deaths in particular are alarmingly high in both absolute terms and when compared to those of non-African descent and non-indigenous women in this region. Structural racism and sexism are evident in maternal health disparities that exist across income levels and national and regional borders. Which is why we're so proud that the International Conference on Population and Development Programme of Action recognises the intersectional nature of inequalities, in particular gender and racial discrimination. And while we celebrate the incredible progress that has been achieved through to the 30th anniversary of ICPD this year, we know that there is much more work to be done. In 2015, as a global community, we made a commitment to leave no one behind. In order to accomplish this, it is imperative that we continue to shine a spotlight on those of whom progress is limited or even non-existent, and that we design targeted interventions that address the barriers that they face. It's also imperative that we showcase positive examples of programming best practices to identify what is possible, how to accelerate it, and where we can to facilitate knowledge transfer and learning. At UNFPA, we make sure this is possible by applying a human rights-based and gender-responsive approach throughout all of our strategies to address disadvantages and promote the guaranteed dignity and equality of all people. As part of UNFPA's new operational plan on leaving no one behind, we've outlined a clear vision. Those furthest behind must enjoy sexual and reproductive health and rights, as UNFPA explicitly prioritises addressing intersectional, persistent and extreme disadvantages, discrimination and disempowerment. And in our work with government, civil society, national statistical offices and others, we promote and facilitate the disaggregation of data to strengthen the visibility of marginalised populations. To support maternal health outcomes among women of descent communities, we also provide tools to ensure the continuity of prenatal and postnatal care, safe births, access to contraception, gender-based violence prevention and response services, as well as the protection of frontline health personnel, including, importantly, of midwives. UNFPA is proud to champion advocacy for reducing inequalities faced by descent communities, including the promotion of policies and action plans to combat racial and gender discrimination as a fundamental aspect of promoting equality. During this CSW, and indeed throughout the year, as we approach the Summit of the Future in September, let's just be reminded that in a world of 8 billion people, we are only as far ahead as those of us who remain furthest behind. I'd like to underscore that our collective future and path to sustainable development truly depends on addressing the root causes of racism, sexism, and discrimination in all its forms. Without it, intergenerational poverty will continue to limit women's access to health, education, employment, and human rights, including sexual and reproductive health and rights, jeopardizing the well-being of society as a whole. UNFPA, as the UN's principal sexual and reproductive health agency, remains committed to work with you all in advancing the rights of dissent, racialized and marginalized communities, particularly women and girls and young people, using a human rights-based approach. We're committed to supporting you in increasing the visibility of your lived experiences and urging targeted actions to ensure that the dignity and allow the women and girls to fulfill their full potential and their human rights. We also remain committed to identifying positive examples of programming best practices and facilitating knowledge transfer around the world. As we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the International Conference of Population Development this year, I ask you to join us in seizing every opportunity to achieve our shared vision of a world that is inclusive, equitable, fair, and sustainable for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing in very pertinent points, but I'd just like to focus on 2 things that you said. One is, how do we look at the best practices? I think that's important, so that we don't, we know that there are some practices that really work and there are some policies that are really bringing in positive changes, so how do we look at that? And we congratulate UNFPA in having some of those really forward-thinking policies that they're working on, specifically looking at racism and discrimination. We do know that no matter how great a policy can be, but if there are barriers to accessing that policy, then nobody is able to access that. So thinking of ways of how we can address racism, discrimination is absolutely critical to achieving the 2030 agenda. So thank you very much, Julia. I'd now like to go to our next guest and keynote speaker, Ms. Marie Elena. She's given a very short introduction, but is heading the racial justice. She's the racial justice lead at UN Women. Marie, time is yours.
Thank you so much, Veena, and I'm very honored to be sitting here to represent our Deputy Executive Director, who was scheduled to be here and could not make it. So this is definitely an honor. Honorable Secretary of Nepal Ministry of Women, Children, and Senior Citizens, Ms. Julia Bunting, Director of UNFPA Division, Technical Division and Policy and Strategy Division, fellow panelists, representing communities discriminated on work and dissent, and participants. Welcome, good afternoon. I and we all, those of us who are not members of this community, are here in solidarity with the 260 million plus people globally who are facing some of the most horrific forms of discrimination, communities discriminated on work and dissent, or CDWD. I would like us to keep in mind this working definition of stigma, because stigma is in the title of the way this meeting was shaped and framed. It is looking towards eradicating stigma in particular. And so I think this definition will say all that there is to say about why we are here. Stigma can be broadly understood as a process of dehumanizing, degrading, discrediting, and devaluing people in certain population groups, often based on a feeling of disgust. Stigma attaches itself to an attribute, quality, or identity that is regarded as inferior or abnormal. And that is a definition that came from the Special Rapporteur on the human right to safe drinking water and sanitation. It applies broadly. And so with that, I will pass over some of the indicators that have been already described by UNFPA that speak to exactly how dire the situation is for CDWD communities. And I will go straight to the fact that we're here as representing our organizations, in my case, UN Women, to speak about organizational best practices. What I would say for this is that the work we do along CDWD community partners is actually the foundational work of all of UN Women's work. You could say informally that it's one of our most long-standing signature approaches, even before we were UN Women, when UNIFEM, those of you who have been around for a while will remember UNIFEM, UNIFEM was one of the 4 entities that made up UN Women. And there, what we did and continue to do is empower women and strengthen their organizations and to help them form networks to amplify their capacity and reach. We help create the spaces for women's participation and self-advocacy in key local political processes and international forums that affect their rights, getting their issues on local, national, and international agendas, as we are working towards right here today, right now in this room. That is what we do. From supporting the establishment of national platforms and networks on which CDWD communities can advocate for their priorities, all the way to spaces like these, CSW, COP, engaging in human rights mechanisms, participating in visits of special procedure mandate holders. We are doing this right now here with you. And we will continue to do this to support what you need to do for yourselves with our support, our assistance. On the flip side, we also work with governments. We support their capacity building of the civil servants who interface with the ministries, who interface with the making of the creation of laws and policies to formulate and implement gender, race, and ethnicity responsive plans and policies. I know for sure that they're doing excellent work with your governments in Nepal, and so we thank you for that. Yet, although this is our foundational work, it is not a one-size-fits-all approach when we work with women from different communities. And in the case of CDWD women, for example, what we do in Brazil, primarily with rural Quilombola women, differs quite a bit from what we are doing in, let's say, the Western Balkans, where our collaborations with Romani women are tailored to urban conditions and also include elements of direct support to the communities, for example, training in IT-related spaces or door-to-door campaigns in cities around ending violence against women. Another one of the foundational areas of work that are also of relevance to your communities is addressing the lack of data on intersectionality in general, women and girls, but also within that broad category of women and girls. And it is top of our agenda to do better on that. You may have heard of our Women Count strategy, a strategy for more and better gender data to bring about a radical shift in how gender statistics are used, created, and promoted. Beyond our broad-based approaches that I've just described, I also want to talk about our specific key strategic and policy response in the racial justice space, where your community, I say your community because most of the people in this room are from these communities, where your communities are based. Clearly in racial justice, even though it may not be an immediate racial issue, it certainly falls in the umbrella and it comes under this underserved as well. What UN Women noted in the 2022 report by the Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Racism, which specified that Agenda 23, and this is a quote, largely fails to fulfill its pledge to leave no one behind when it comes to the principles of racial equality and non-discrimination. UN Women therefore set out to place great importance on UN-wide, because it was not one agency, it is the entire UN system that was identified. And so we place great emphasis on UN-wide collaboration, and we are active in the UN Network on Racial Discrimination and the Protection of Minorities. I want to make special mention here and thank UNFPA and UNDP, including the colleagues that sit on that mechanism. Patricia De Silva, Rita Isaac Ndiaye, Omaima David is here from UNFPA, as is Sabrina Schumer. These are the people that are doing the work behind the scenes to push the UN system to do more and to do better on racial discrimination. Simultaneously, in UN Women, we are developing guidance on what is this intersectional racial justice lens. What is that? How can we craft that? We are seeking input and collaboration from our partners, including those of you from this community, and we are really hoping to make this something that the people that we serve end up creating. Finally, we have grounded our racial justice work in changing harmful norms and stereotypes, because we recognize that these are key drivers of discrimination and stigmatization. It's very important to fight stigma, looking at it from this angle, because these are deeply, deeply rooted societal norms that drive notions of purity and pollution, and that end up creating the forms of discrimination that you face. And in this context, we put special emphasis on leveraging creative expression and the creative arts, which are proven to be highly effective. In Nepal, we are doing work with storytelling in this vein, as we are in some of the Roma communities and beyond. With that, I will hand over back to you, Bina, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Maria Elena. I think you brought in some really good practices, and I'd just like to quickly highlight that. Supporting networks to amplify the issues of racial justice, women's participation, capacity building, responsive policies. I think this is really important, because a lot of times we look at policies and we keep saying that it has to be universal, but how do we target? We have policies that are targeting to specific communities that are left behind and tailor-made, lack of data, and definitely everything that we do has to be intersectional. I think that is key to building these networks and taking this work forward. Thanks so much. So now I would like to thank the three keynote speakers, and we would now go to the community voices. Before we go to the community voices, just to quickly narrate a short incident that happened during COVID, when the country, I'm a Dalit woman from India, and suddenly the country shut down, and there were, policies announced. There were, people could go to shops and get groceries that were at a very, very small, you pay a very less amount. So there were new schemes and programs that were announced, and one of the a Dalit woman from one of the villages in one of the states went to pick up her groceries, just like everybody else had that right to do so. And when she went, she was beaten up because she was a Dalit woman, to say that why are you coming here to take free ration, whereas this is not for you. You come if there is something that is left over, or you come back if all the others have got in the village, and then you come back. So no matter what policy we have, no matter what program we have, but if we still have discrimination based on any of these based on race, based on caste, based on, you know, these communities discriminated on work and descent, no policy will work. So if we have to have policies that are actually going to go down and work for the community, we have to first work with the governments, with the UN agencies, with civil society, to ensure that we sort of break down these barriers so that women, men, and children can access these schemes and entitlements. So just to now go to the three speakers from the ground. First of all, we have Ms. Simona Toronskoy, who's a senior researcher and advocacy officer with the Global Forum of Communities Discriminated on Work and Descent. She has done a lot of work on the rights of Roma, and she's Roma herself. So over to you, Simona.
Thank you very much, Bina, and thank you all for joining us. Dear panelists, dear colleagues, dear audience. It's a great joy to be here today. It's my first official CSW event, so it's a big deal. So, as Bina said, I'm a Roma woman. I come from Romania, and I must acknowledge that I'm coming from a very privileged position to be here today to speak with you. And today I'll be talking on behalf of marginalized Roma communities. As you might have heard, Roma women are one of Europe's largest communities discriminated on work and descent, accounting to 18 million across Europe. And Romani women often find themselves at the cruel intersection of anti-Gypsyism, which is a specific form of Roma discrimination, but also gender-based and institutional violence. And it is widely known, and many European Union institutions have acknowledged this, that discrimination, humiliation, exclusions are the drivers of poverty, but also a consequence of it. Discrimination, whether it's based on gender, ethnicity, sexuality, or other grounds, can lead to exclusion and restrict pathways out of poverty. According to the Fundamental Rights Agency data, in their latest report on Roma situation in Europe, 4 out of 5 Roma live at risk of poverty. On average, 80% of Roma in the surveyed countries were at risk of poverty. 1 out of every 2nd Roma live in a household that cannot afford to pay for at least one of the following items: unexpected expenses, a meal involving meat, adequate heating of a dwelling, or materials goods such as a washing machine, a telephone, a car, or any sort of payments like utility bills and so on. Every 2nd Roma child, which is about 54%, lives in a household in severe material deprivation. So think that this is Europe. A most recent study from Turkey from 2022 shows that there is an estimated of 2.5 to 5 million Roma living in Turkey, and most of them suffer from exclusion, extreme levels of poverty and nutrition. What's the root cause of poverty? This is also the theme of our event. Well, it's discrimination, because discrimination leads to fewer jobs opportunities, it restricts you to access available public goods and services, so discrimination is the key. The anti-Roma sentiment in Europe is quite noticeable. Roma have been experiencing repeatedly evictions from their informal settlements, which is also an expression of discrimination. In addition to poverty, as I have shared before, the biggest challenge of Roma women is the male-dominated structures, discourses and practices that exclude gender out of the discussion. So the main challenge of Roma women is their presence from key policy documents, and we have conducted together with some other partners from Europe, including ERGO Network, Romalitico, and the Feminist Collective of Romani Gender Experts. We concluded a survey, and it was revealed that out of the 16 survey countries, only in 8 countries Roma are part of the so-called National Roma Strategies, which is a European tool to address the situation of Roma in Europe. So the lack of presence of Roma women in this type of documents completely shows that there is a need to advance the situation of Roma women, but also include them in equality strategies, poverty strategies, health strategies, most importantly, education and employment. Thank you. I'll give the floor to Bina. Thank you, Bina.
Thank you, Simona. I think the first round of questions for three of them, I'm sorry I forgot to mention this to the rest, that how are the women from the CDWD communities experiencing poverty differently as opposed to other women? So thanks very much, Simona. I think it's really important that we have to have a seat at the table. And that's what Simona is saying, that there is a saying that I always repeat, and at the risk of repeating again, I'd say that if you're not at the table, then you're part of the menu. And I think we have to be at the table, and I think that's so important because, you know, you have a bunch of men formulating policies for women, or you have a bunch of people formulating policies for people from marginalized communities. It's really important that we need that quality representation. So thanks, Simona. Over to Ms. Veselina Diaz, who's the legal coordinator of the National Coordination for the Articulation of Black Rural Quilombola Communities, otherwise known as CONAQ, from Brazil. She's also from the Quilombola community, and she will speak in Portuguese, but we do have interpretation. Thank you.
Obrigada, Bina. Um prazer enorme estar aqui novamente, né, representando as comunidades quilombolas. Eu sou Versilene Dias e quem vai transmitir a mensagem em inglês é a nossa intérprete, Ana.
Thank you very much. It's a big pleasure to be here representing the Quilombola community. My name is Versilene Dias, and Ana will be my interpreter.
A fome, a pobreza, né, ela afeta as
Poverty
comunidades.
affects the Quilombola communities in several ways.
E eu vou enumerar aqui 5 violações,
And I'm going to give you
as mulheres
5
quilombolas
specific
sofrem
ones that the Quilombola women
por estar nessa
suffer
situação de
because of
pobreza.
discrimination, because of this situation of poverty.
São violações do direito ao território.
Those are violations of right to land.
As comunidades, a gente hoje tem no Brasil cerca de 6.000 comunidades quilombolas.
We have in Brazil about 6,000 Quilombola communities.
Grande parte dessas
And
comunidades
most
não
part of
tem
those
seus
communities
territórios
don't
titulados, ou seja, não tem segurança na
don't have a
sua
title or
moradia.
deed to their territories. They don't have right to living in those places.
E essa luta pelo território ela é
This
promovida
fight
pelas mulheres
for land is promoted by the Quilombola women.
que precisam do território para sua
Who need
subsistência.
who need that land for their subsistence.
A segunda violação
The
é a
second
violação do não
violation
acesso ao sistema de justiça. Ou
is
seja,
not having access
em
to
especial as mulheres quilombolas, elas não
the
conseguem
right to
acessar
law.
o sistema de justiça,
some of those women
ou
don't
não
are
saber
not
onde
able
procurar acessar,
to have law representation because they don't know
até
where
acessar
to
esse
get
sistema. Ou pelos empecilhos para acessar esse sistema.
because there are burdens for them to access that system.
A violação do direito ao acesso à educação de qualidade,
The violation to
por não-
access to
por estarem em territórios. Por estar em territórios rurais, grande parte das meninas e estudantes quilombolas não acessam a educação de qualidade.
yeah, so they don't have access to education of
Para
quality.
ter um exemplo de como que essas meninas fazem para acessar o
So-
sistema, a gente que acaba para ter acesso à educação sofrem mais violações. Para ter acesso à educação, acaba sofrendo mais violações. Para ter acesso
So in
à
order to
educação,
have access to education,
acaba sofrendo mais
they
violações.
suffer more violations.
A exemplo das meninas Calunga,
One example is the Kalunga girls. young girls,
que para acessar a educação vai morar nos pequenos
that in
municípios.
order for them to have access to education, they go live in like away from the community.
Em casa de famílias de classe média alta.
They go to live in like high middle class families' homes, away from home.
E acabam sofrendo exploração e trabalho infantil.
And they end up
Sofrendo
being
violações
exploited
sexuais.
sexually, and their labor is also exploited.
A quarta são violações ao acesso a um meio ambiente equilibrado, né?
So there also, another violation is access to like a balanced environment.
Em especial as mulheres quilombolas que trabalham.
Especially those Quilombola women who work
Para manter
in
território
order to
de
keep
subsistência, o meio ambiente,
a subsistence
a vida
territory,
território.
like their lives in that territory or in that land.
Porque as comunidades quilombolas
Because the Quilombola communities
têm um trabalho essencial na preservação
have
do meio
an
ambiente.
essential role in preserving the environment.
E violações do direito à vida, né?
And violations to the right to life.
A gente distribuiu um panfleto que trata sobre racismo e violência nas comunidades quilombolas.
We handed out some flyers that talk about racism and violence in those Quilombola communities.
Que foi uma pesquisa desenvolvida
That
pela CONAQ juntamente com a
it talks
organização
about
Terra
a
de Direitos,
research made by CONAQ
que mostra como que a
that
violência
shows how
afeta
the violence
diretamente
affected
as mulheres
directly
quilombolas
the
que estão
Quilombola
ali na
women
luta de
who are
frente,
fighting in
na
the
defesa dos seus territórios.
defending their territories.
E para se ter uma ideia, só esse
So
ano
that we can have an idea,
11
just this
quilombolas
year,
foram
11 Quilombolas were
de
murdered
forma violenta.
in a violent way.
E como que a gente pode, o que pode ser feito
What can
para
be
minimizar ou
done to
eliminar
minimize or eliminate
os impactos da pobreza
the
sobre
impact of
essas
poverty
comunidades, em
on those
especial as
communities,
mulheres? Né?
especially women?
Acho que uma sugestão é a
I
criação
think a
de
suggestion
mecanismos,
would
né,
be creative
resoluções
mechanisms, resolutions,
instrumentos
instruments
que faça com que os
that
governos
can make government can push for the government to
criem políticas para o
create
enfrentamento
politics to overcome
às violações de direitos dessas
those
comunidades.
violations of the rights of those communities.
Para além disso, é
Beyond
necessário
that, it is necessary
que
that
seja feito o monitoramento dessas políticas, da sua efetividade, ou
for those policies to be monitored,
seja, monitore os resultados no território.
monitoring the results in the field itself.
Porque não é somente necessário criar políticas, mas é também necessário que essas políticas tenham resultados positivos nas comunidades.
Yeah, you cannot only, it's not just creating policies, like those policies have to generate positive results in the field.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Obrigado, Seleni. I think she's brought in a lot of different situations that women from the Quilombola communities have found similar to what Roma and Dalit women face. So I'll not go into it, but of course increase in violence, exploitation, these are some of the indicators that are very common to the women represented here on the panel. I'd also like to say that she's one of the young women that was chosen by President Lula when he got re-elected to look at the rights of Quilombola women. So she's very special to us. Thank you, Veselini. So I'll now move to Queen from Africa. She'll bring in the perspective from Africa. She is also the advocacy officer and UN expert on Africa with GFOD.
Thank you so much, Bina. Thank you, fellow panelists and participants. I would like to recall that during the opening ceremony of the CSW, the President of the General Assembly, Dalit Francis, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and even the Chairperson Antonio Manuel all mentioned in their opening remarks that more than 400 million of women worldwide face poverty. In that, 1 on 10 of them face extreme poverty with less than $1.90 per day. And this is a great obstacle to the achievement of the 2030 agenda. And it was also mentioned that if nothing is done by 2030, about 80% of these women will not be able to subsist. Now, when we look at these figures around the world, more than 100 million of them are from Africa, not to talk about women from communities. Poverty amongst women from the communities discriminated on work and Decsent is a persistent challenge. And this is rooted within the historical injustice, the discrimination, and even social stigma. Despite the progress in gender equality, these communities still face disproportionate level of poverty, rendering their economic and social development. Talking about the root causes, yes, we are talking about stigma, but I also want to point out the state policies. In Africa, the state policies do not really take into account the communities discriminated on work in Decsent, especially the situation of the women. When you come to have a discussion with one of the states or one person from the government, they will tell you there are programs of empowerment for these communities they call vulnerable and minority communities. And when you want to mention the respect and the protection of their rights, they will tell you the preamble of the constitutions guarantees respect and protection for every individual in the country, including women from these communities. But in the reality, these opportunities do not reach out to communities, women from the communities discriminated work in Decsent. So apart from stigma, I am pointing out the state policies. Now, the second root cause I want to mention for Africa is limited access to education. Women from communities discriminated work in Decsent in Africa have limited access to education due to direct exclusion and even societal bias. With no education, they don't have the skills and the qualification to secure better paying jobs. And this is limiting their opportunities to the economic sphere. And by this doing, they are deep into poverty. I want to take some few cases to illustrate the lack of education, pushing into ignorance. In Nigeria, for example, we have the Osu community, where we have women who do not go to school. They are serving in a shrine and serving a priest and working there for him until a particular period or an age where the god of the shrine will decide that it is the time of this girl child or the woman to leave the community. We have a similar case in the Ewe community in Ghana, where the Trokosi practice is still going on. A young girl and a woman is dedicated to a priest in a shrine to serve as an atonement for the sins that a member of her family has committed. And she is there bonded in labor and also a victim of sexual violence by this priest. Should I mention Niger? There were other sex slaves from the Tuareg community and also from the Arab community who are as victims of violence. They are treated as commodities. They are sold, they are loaned, and even offered as gift for marriage. Their children born inherit the status of slave and are given out to the master who decides of their fate, even to the extent of education. I will also want to mention limited access to employment. the women from the Aratin community in Mauritania do not have access to employment, and therefore they find themselves doing meager jobs, and because it's not well paid, they meet themselves into prostitution, thereby exacerbating the cases of poverty for the Aratin women. I would just like to add land grabs, because I am called to my time is up. Women from Mali, from the Kayes community, they see their lands taken away. They don't have right to property. And because of that, they have nowhere to live. They meet themselves begging on the street, the women with their children around them. How will the poverty stop? In Ghana, there is the Kayaye women. They left from the northern part of Ghana to the southern part because their lands were taken away. They come to Ghana, hustling around, carrying bags for people in the market, and they have nowhere to sleep. They sleep in dump areas, and they don't even have where to take their bath. Talk less of having food to eat. The poverty will still continue due to discrimination, and if there is no specific policy, state policy, to address the situation of women from these communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Queen. Sorry to rush you, but I would like to give some time for the audiences to ask their questions. So quickly, yes, limited access to education, I think that runs across. But just to specifically say of this Trokotsi practices, which is very similar to the Devdasi system in India, it's very similar. So you can see that the community discriminated on work and descent, whether it's in India or whether the women are from Africa, they face the same kind of exclusionary practices that are there to this day. And of course, bondage, that is also one common, whether it's bonded to the labor that you're doing, whether you're a child labor, or it's intergenerational, poverty continues as a cycle because of this bondage. We will come back to the strategies maybe at your closing, but I'd like to open the floor now. Before I open the floor, I'd like to acknowledge that we have about 50 participants online with us. It is very late in the day for many in South Asia. I know many have joined us from Africa, South Asia. So thank you very much for joining us. Please put your questions in the comments, and our colleague Carla and others will inform us of the questions. Before I open the floor, we have with us Ms. Bandana Rana, who's a CDAW member. So I'd request her to say a few words, and then others who would like to have some comments or questions. Let's keep it brief so that more people can get to speak. So, if you need the mic. Oh, there.
Thank you so much. This has been a very enlightening panel, but I got on the spot. But however, I'm very happy to have attended this panel and to let you know that in the CEDAW committee, we are concerned, and we are deeply, we do take moves in terms of Article 14 on rural women. We do address the concerns of this community in terms of access to education, access to opportunities, access to amenities, and their participation in the decision making. So I will not take much time, but I just want to let you know that we stand in solidarity with your concerns and wish you all the best. Anytime, please, when your country is reporting to the CEDAW committee, make sure you send us a very brief comments about the concerns you would want us to raise with your state party during the dialogue, and the committee will make sure that we raise that and include it in the recommendations sent to your state party. So I stand in solidarity with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I can open the floor now. I think the mics are working on your desk, so if you can just open and then speak. I'd also request the keynote speakers, it's up to you if anyone of you would like to respond, but it's also okay if you don't want to respond.
Namaste. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Venu Mayaguru from Alliance Against Trafficking in Women and Children in Nepal. My query is to the Queen that she's mentioned about sex slave, regarding the sex slave and the prostitution in his in region or country. So just my query is could you, as it is one of the, we are talking about the traditional kind of sex worker or other things, but at the same time we have the modern day slavery also in the various sectors in Nepal also and in the cross border as well. So could you please share some more, some initiation or good practices to address this modern kind of slavery or trafficking, as you mentioned about the sold of the women for the sex work as well as the minors. So is there any good practices or the initiation in your experience? It will be helpful for our countries also. Thank you.
We'll take a few questions and then we will request the panelists. Yes.
Yes, so I hope I'm audible. So in terms of strategies, I know a lot of, both institutional as well as state-backed, and in terms of poverty alleviation and wealth creation, they suggest microfinancing and self-help groups, particularly for women who come from these marginalized communities. But how effective are they in terms of long-term change?
Thanks, Christina. Anyone else? Yes, please.
I would like to know how, when we say, state that education is the best way of giving it back to the communities for them to have access to resources and other things. When it is so structural and systemic violence, keeping people away from education, how have we been able to bridge this? Policies, are they enough? How do we make those policies work?
There's some, yes, please, go ahead.
Hi everyone. I just want to start by thanking the organizer of this event for this opportunity to gather here and to have such a conversation. So my follow-up question will be for Dina and also for Queen. So Dina, in your intervention, you mentioned something about Nepal having great initiatives, and also Nepal could lead on gender equality, if I paraphrase well. So my follow-up question is to know, is that possible to highlight the challenges on the ground that prevent those initiatives from translating into concrete progress on the ground? And also, I have another follow-up question for Queen, and she mentioned something about work with different stakeholders, but unfortunately those work are, people in local communities, they don't feel the result of this work. And this is also something that Queen mentioned, they work with stakeholder, UN agency, government, but it's so sad to see that the local authorities, they are not involved in the process. So my follow-up question is to know, what are the process to involve the local leaders from those countries, because they know the challenge of those people and they are well suited to discuss what those people are going through, so the changes can be concrete. I'm sorry, because I'm also in the United Nations, I'm an economist at the World Bank, so I know what I'm talking about. Sometimes you just copy and paste programs from different countries and apply to different countries. So what will be done this time so those changes can be concrete, and next time when we meet here, it's not to talk about the same thing, but to talk about the progress that we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and then we will request the panelists to respond.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to all. Thank you very much, and congratulations to all the panelists. One of the things that's a major gap that I see, because I am also part of this community, but from one region. The Human Rights Council in Geneva, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals or other bodies here in New York have not sufficiently recognized the specific exclusion, discrimination and violence that these communities are going through. So one of the things what the communities are attempting to do is bring out a demand for a declaration on the rights of these communities, of course women, but communities discriminated on work and descent. And one appeal, especially to the CEDAW committee member, whether it's possible to consider a general recommendation, because it is not just one exclusion like Dalits, but it is Roma, Dalit, Haratin, and several other African identities, as well as from Latin America, Quilombola and Palenque. And it will be really powerful to start off this process at the SDGs and other processes. If you can highlight that these communities as a group need specific protection measures, which are not within the race mechanism, which are not in the minorities, and in the other gender-related policies. So this is an appeal that is coming from the community. Thank you.
Thank you. So I request the panelists to speak. Paul, just a clarification. This is in addition to the General Recommendation 29.
General Recommendation 29 is CERD. But
yes.
CEDAW has a scope for a general recommendation. If we give the material, I'm sure Ms. Vandana, who's the member, would be able to take it up.
You would like to respond? Yes, please.
Thank you so much for your interest on a general recommendation addressing this community. What I would suggest is, the process of drafting a general recommendation, as you know, is extremely lengthy process, a very facilitative and participatory process, and we are constrained of human and financial resources as well within the committee. And one general recommendation, we can only work on one general recommendation at one time, which takes around 2 years. And at the moment, we are almost on the verge of completing a general recommendation on women's participation in leadership positions. And it has been decided that our next general recommendation will be on gender stereotypes, which I happen to be leading, actually. So I would say that the next, it's a very cross-cutting issue, as you know, but the next general recommendation on stereotypes will definitely, address these concerns within that scope as well. But I would suggest that you remain alert to the processes that are taking place within the CEDAW committee when we open up for input written, as well as there will be regional consultations on this particular general recommendation. Once you've reached there, and if you look at the present general recommendations we have, and you still feel that your issues are not adequately covered, perhaps we could have more, you should engage more with the CEDAW committee to justify the need for a general recommendation, which we can then look into.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So, others? Queen, would you like to start? Yeah.
Yes, I want to, the best practices for the sexual slave is more of seeking solidarity from those who are not from the community, and also multiplying campaigns for the visibility of these communities, because the issue around is the fact that these violations and these practices continue because they are not visibilized. We have these communities amongst us, living with us, living in our villages, but we are not aware of their existence. The civil society, the CSOs, the groups should multiply joint actions in sensitizing, awareness, and even creating solidarity. Because once we are in a group, we are more powerful, and all these masters and all the perpetrators, at least we take a step backward. So this is my answer to the best practices. And this is what GFOD has started doing since last year, visiting, having few country visits to reach out to communities and also to visibilize the CSW communities. And the other question was,
working with stakeholders locally. What is your strategy?
Yeah, working with stakeholders locally is also to try to understand the machinery they are putting in place to address these communities and see how we can jointly collaborate with them to actually address the situation of community discriminated work in Decsent. Multilateral, bilateral stakeholders, the National Human Institution, the government, like stakeholders in an inclusive manner to address understanding the machinery. Each of them are putting in place and working together for a common goal, which is to put an end to this discrimination and all these forms of violation towards community discriminated work in Decsent and women in particular. Thank you.
I would like to answer the question about access to microfinance. There is an NGO in the Western Balkans called Roma Entrepreneurship Development Initiative, which is trying to support Roma entrepreneurs to register their business, because many of them are having informal businesses, selling clothes or all sorts of stuff. So they are trying to support Roma entrepreneurs, including women, to access microfinance. And it started a few years ago. It's not a long-term thing to see what are the effects, but so far it has been shown that their businesses have become more digitalized. They have all sorts of innovative strategies to sell their products, and also going mainstream, like outside the Roma neighborhoods. But it seems like it's a positive development.
Maria Elena, would you like
Thank you. I would like to respond to what you said so profoundly about, education being the way, yet the structural violence is so deep in the entire society that it can't happen, because it's just not how people see things, those in power. It just keeps you away from the things that you're supposed to be able to access. And so for that, I would like to mention again the importance of changing the social norms and stereotypes, because that's what really drives it. It is super important. You must do the work with the laws and the policies. You must do that. You must do the work with the economic empowerment, but you also have to do the work with changing how those who are in power, and even those who are discriminated against, see what is normal. It is normalized. They've absorbed racism or casteism, I will also use that word, from before they could speak. They didn't have the words, but they understood what, that's how people learn and absorb. And that is not going to change by changing a law. We're seeing it here or with an election. We're seeing it in many parts of the world where election seem to have made a change. There's, racism is over now. Yet, all you needed to do was have a shift, and you could see that it was superficial and it had not changed. And the key way to change this, one of them, is through, I'm using the term artistic expression, which some of you may think of as very limited, but it really isn't. It is storytelling, it is media, it is social media. It is those small groups of TikTok influencers that have, those unknown outside of their communities, but the entire communities of young people follow what they say, and that is how, in this creative process, that norms become changed. Movies, films, songs, street theaters, whatever people are looking, sitcoms. Can you imagine a sitcom that is very popular because it has all of the popular actors in it, that completely turns how people do things on their head, that has those who are discriminated against in leading, glamorous, powerful roles. These are the kinds of things that will make the change across the board, and they're also important to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Versailles. Would you like to respond? Okay. So just to quickly, I think I'll give 1 minute to all the panelists to give their concluding remarks and also to give a call of action. But there is one question that I think is important, which the online viewers have sent in. The plight of communities discriminated in work and Decsent is not expressly expressly provided in SDGs. What is the UN doing to correct this to future development agenda? To my best understanding, CDWD falls under the other status in SDG 10.2. So if anybody has any thoughts, and what are the protection measures and policies to be put in place during conflict or disasters? These are some of the questions, so if anybody would like to. So now I'd like to start from my left. Veselini, if you can give just 1 minute, just concluding remarks, please. If you'd like to add anything. Anna?
I think I would like to thank everyone for your presence, everyone's presence, and support. I hope everyone who's here feels sensitive to our plight and fight for the rights of those discriminated. And support the creation of a resolution by the UN that can bring and talk about the violation of our rights, so that the government in our countries can act with the approval of policies that guarantee the overcome of poverty, essentially for the women from those communities suffer the most impact of that violence. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will just say that if there is a call to action, and I believe there is, I, in my capacity as the senior racial lead at UN Women, would be very pleased to provide whatever support I can with the organization as well, within the confines of what is possible to be done. You know how UN agencies cannot do everything, but with whatever is possible, we can count on it. Thank you.
Yes, and I request Simona, a quick call to action, and then we'll have to.
I think it's very important for us that discrimination towards our communities, whether it is anti-Gypsyism or anti any of our communities, that must be recognized. And it's very important to have the necessary legislation in place, but also to ensure that something is happening on the ground. Having legislation is a political will, but then we have to move this forward. So having a strong anti-discrimination framework would be a necessary step for our communities.
Yes, so we are calling for a declaration of the rights of communities discriminated on work and descent. So we'd like the states and UN agencies and civil society organizations represented here to support us. I'd just like to say a big thank you to everyone in this room and the others who have joined us from around the world on Zoom. To the Nepal mission, a very big thanks and gratitude. You've been very supportive of this cause, and we hope that you will continue to lead this. To UN Women, UNFPA, Patricia, Elena, I can't thank you enough, who worked very hard along with Paul and his team at GFOD to make this event. And a big thank you to Rita. I hope you're online with us. We're sorry you can't be here, but we hope next time. So thank you all, Jai Bhim and Johan. There is food, so please, while you go out, I think our team is there at the door, so please collect.